A longshoreman, the name, I guess it was derived from men along the shore. Some folks confuse us with seafarers. We don't sail the ship. We are men along the shore waiting for the ship to come in. And in the old days, you could even hear the ship horn blow, and it sounds out throughout the community, and everyone knows ship's in port, we can probably go down there and get a job today, right? It's still pretty much like that, so to speak. Longshoremen here are really temporary workers. We get hired today, we get fired today. Once we have been released from work today, there is no guarantee that you'll work tomorrow. There's no guarantee that you'll work again. Fortunately, that's not the case. Your first challenge is to get a job. And if you secure the job, the lower your seniority, the chances are the harder the job. Because once guys get to where the seniority would afford them, a less arduous task, they'll get it. They know the easy ships. They know what job is, easier than the other. We don't stop for weather unless it's, very violent. We work and we don't stop for rain, anything like that. You can work very long hours. They may keep you out there all day to day and all night to night. But you do have the luxury to, we call it check out. At 4 o'clock, you can say, I'm done at 5, get somebody for me. And there are folks hanging around hoping that you will check out so they can at least get a half a loaf for the day. The one thing I loved about it on my career is on the docks is it's never boring and mundane because you're never going to do the same thing every day. And we have 6 different terminals, so you're even going to be at the same terminal every day. It's going to the same building, turning the same knob every day, later for that. But that's why it was so difficult for me to leave the dock and come in the office. Because once I got out on the docks, I never wanted to see an office, at least in the corporate world again. But my brother and I decided a long time ago that if we were going to stay here, we had to get involved, because when we came to the docks, there was not anyone here that had a formal education as far as college education. There was few with high school education, but there was just a lot of illiteracy. And it was such a wonderful place to work, and the benefits of it, I'm thinking, they're not going to be able to hold this. I told him, I went to my first union meeting and was horrified what I saw. Came back home that night and said, man, we got to get involved. This thing is not going to last like this. And that's what we did. I was elected to office my first year on the docks. The events leading up to the Charleston Five were that we had been working for the shipping company for some 30 years. Even though we had experienced some degree of non-union infiltration into our work on the old manual style of work, never would we want to see that happen with containerization. Because again, that's our bread and butter. That's where we make our money. That's where our benefits are funded through that more so than anything else. Because there's so much tonnage moving with that type of operation. And if we had allowed this one shipping company to go non-union, it would drive down the rates on all the other vessels and make it difficult to remain competitive with this one particular steamship line. We later found out that this steamship line was like a maverick. They didn't want to belong to any association, any group of shippers. They wanted to be able to do their own thing wherever they sailed. That posed a very serious problem for us. And so when they decided that they were not going to use unionized workers, the ILA, we knew that from day one we had to fight. So basically, we tried to meet with them, have discussions, let them know that this was going to be very problematic for us. Did everything we possibly could to negotiate with them, but they were determined, their minds were made up. Well, we knew right then we had to win. We had to get them back to the table. And my biggest fear was that it was going to interrupt other cargo was not going to be pretty for the port. So I went to everyone that was in a leading position in the city, state, and in the industry. The governor, the mayor, chairman of the Maritime Association, the Port Authority CEO, everyone to say, listen, we have tried to meet with this company. We're not getting anywhere. This is going to be a problem. If anything you can do to try to weigh in now, we would like for you to do that. And of course, whether they did or not, it didn't have a positive result. So I always like to get my point of view out there first. Don't leave it up to the media. So before we act in any given situation, I make sure I go and sit down with everyone one-on-one to explain if something should happen, this is the reason why. We've done everything we could. It's the last resort.
One of the companies here, a company coming out of Denmark, Nordana, they were, and the rise of a competitor in the Georgetown area, starting a company that would attract non-union workers and using an area up at the old Navy Yard in the North Charleston area to grow that non-union workforce in the longshore job area. That effort is a manifestation of the political attitude of the state, which is anti-labor or anti-unionized labor. Philosophically central to the development of this state, and Charleston included, is that it came into existence with a labor problem. Its original congenital labor force was an enslaved labor force that was not compensated in any way, shape, or form. So it manifests itself today here with very hard-nosed so-called right-to-work laws. And all of those elements played a part in the thinking of this company. And I'm trying to remember the name, but they were trying, this guy was trying to develop it to grow non-union longshore workers, longshoremen. Now, one variable in that is the fact that this union, I would say, is 99% African American. And it's in many ways, content-wise, clusters of families who have been longshoremen for generations. So the connection to this work in families goes back from grandfather to son to grandson. Now, the politics of the state currently, and that period more obviously, was where the Christian right was playing a key role, the conservative movement. And we had an attorney general who had higher political aspirations in terms of becoming governor. There was a demonstration on the waterfront around a ship that came in. It made a lot of press. Some men were detained and released by the judge who heard them. And in a few days or a week, so this local attorney general picked it up and rearrested 5 of them on rioting. I think it was felony rioting charges. He saw an opportunity that he thought would further his political agenda and aspirations. So there were a number of pieces, a number of component parts that came together in an opportunistic moment.
We went out there several times and we were picketing. And of course, some of the members realized that, we can stand out here with signs all day long in the heat, in the cold, whatever. But it was still very painful to see that first ship ever in the history of the port, container ship comes into the port, work and sail, and not one ILA member, was employed. So that was very sobering, very painful. And then, so we began to picket. And we agreed that every time the ship came to port, we would be out there doing that. And we continued to picket, but then some of the members, and my brother being one of them, knew that if you don't start to ratchet it up a little bit, we could be out here forever. And so we quickly found out that that if we ratcheted up a little bit, it was going to increase the cost of security. That cost would then eventually have to be passed on to Nordana. So then, you know, as a business person heading up Nordana, you would have to think, is it worth it, me paying, you know, getting cheaper labor, but paying the difference in security? Because we were not going to stop picketing. We were not going to stop trying to interrupt the flow of the cargo and operation. We were going to do that. And every time that ship came, it became more painful. And we realized that if we don't do something soon, this may become commonplace, and then the next line will be ready to follow suit. Because we realized at that time there was probably 5 other container lines that was similarly situated that could very well do the same thing. When we started to do a little agitation here and there, it started to interrupt port operations somewhat. Then the Port Authority then started meeting and conferring with the State Attorney General that we have to do something with these dock workers. And then, of course, one of the agents from our state law enforcement division called and said that, yeah, this was actually going on, and there were going to be 600 cops the next time you all go down there. Literally 600. This was during the same time of the WTO in Seattle, when, you know, melee took place there, and they realized that they were undermanned, and so they were overmanned for our pickets. We were having like 30, 45 individuals on the picket line at any given time because we still had to work all these other ships. So Lieutenant Edwards would call me every time the ship was coming and say, listen, how many people are you going to have out there? Because listen, truthfully, I know you guys pretty much peaceful. I don't want to have to take the state's resources and apply to guys just standing up with a picket sign when I got bank robberies and murders and drug smuggling and, you know, these type of things. So, you know, let me know how many people you're going to have. So we had that kind of agreement, gentleman's agreement, where I said, listen, you don't have to send a couple agents down because we're not going to be no more than 25, 30 guys out there. And so he felt, you know, the need to reciprocate that type of communication when he realized that there was going to be 600 cops.
This is a joint law enforcement operation that's scheduled to begin at approximately 16:30 hours today. The arrival of the ship is supposed to be somewhere around 1900 hours. It is the understanding of all public safety agencies involved that this vessel will begin work at approximately 1900 hours and sail from the port of Charleston on Thursday, 20 January at approximately 0700 hours. Now, what we've got in total from those different agencies I've mentioned, we've got about 550 law enforcement officers, okay? So our position in this is we want to have such a show of force to project an image that we can't lose this battle tonight. And it has all the potential of being a battle. But let me preface it by saying this is not a battle that law enforcement can win. This is not going to be solved or settled on the Columbus Street Terminal tonight, the 28th when the next ship comes, or whenever the next ship comes. You communicate with our command post. I'd like you to keep transmissions down to a minimal. If somebody's getting their ass kicked over at Immigration and Morrison Drive, they certainly don't want to hear that, you know, that, hey, I need a relief over whatever location. Please, let's all of us come here healthy and all of us leave healthy. It's going to rain tonight. We're going to get wet. It's going to be cold tonight. So we're going to be wet and cold, okay? Now, let's see what else we need to go over real quick.
I'd actually sort of put it out of my mind until I saw these buses on the interstate that I thought was, you know, tour buses, until I came alongside them and saw that they were actually prison buses. And that's when it dawned on me that, wait a minute, ship tonight, prison buses headed to Charleston, These buses are for us. And sure enough, by the time I got down to our headquarters, which was a little further down the street there, as far as the eye can see, there were cops everywhere. I mean, just everywhere. And so I went back into the hall, and we got with the other two presidents here in the port, and we started planning, because I was amazed at the manpower. I mean, the resources that being, and I know this was overkill, and I know this was to make us look like, you know, there's no need for us in this state. You know, how dare these guys cause the state to spend this kind of resources? Overkill. And and I know we were not going to get nowhere near the ship, so we had a plan that night that we were not going to go down there that night. You know, make them spend the money, but you know, just don't go down there. We'll come back midnight, reassemble, because certainly if they see we're not coming, they're going to cut that manpower in half. And they were doing that, but then they were, I guess, they were infiltrating our ranks, and everything we were saying was being radioed down to the line. So we come back at midnight, and they were blocking folks, and you know, and our members were intimidated and harassed before they could even get to their building. And they said pretty much, listen, we're going to go down there on the picket line like we said we would always do. We're not going to let that ship work in the port unless we are there on the picket line. And you know, I pretty much agreed, and I told them just to be, for God's sakes, be careful and don't instigate anything. And they were left the hall chanting, like they always do with the signs, going into the night. And the three presidents, our strategy was always to stay behind in case something goes down. Then we would be called in to correct it, so that it can't say that the union leadership let it, to avoid being sued or, you know, having some type of sanction put against you.
As I approached the line, you know, the police went through their ritual of telling us that, you know, this was the line and we should not cross, and it warned about trespassing and all of that. And of course, our plan was to continue into the line, telling them, you know, I'm going to work, that's my job. I'm working a ship that's at Columbus Street that day. And of course, as we approached the line, there immediately was, you know, a bracing. Police would take their batons and sort of brace you back on the line, and we kept walking into the lines. And of course, after, you know, it started to escalate, in my opinion, and pushing, and some guys, when they put the batons on their chest, the instinct that they'll grab the baton. They're one of these things, you have a shoving match, and I saw where there was one policeman that was in a pulling match and with one of our guys, and our guys won, and he, you know, he fell, and that started stirring it up a little bit. So, you know, my role then was to diffuse it as any way I can. And
so it wasn't 15 minutes maybe at the most when we got the call that it was happening. It was fighting, you know. And I know that was the last time I saw the other two presidents that night, because, you know, we just ran down the stairs, kept running, and by the time we turned down there, it was just a war zone. I'd never been in the military, but I've been to war, because that was a war that night. And it was, by the grace of God, no one was killed, but a lot of people were injured, including myself.
so, you know, my role then was to diffuse it as any way I can. And what I decided to do, offer the guys, I said, let's go down the track. They blocked the road, let's go down the track. That leads into the terminal. And of course, I started down the tracks, and you know, there were several guys that started up after me, and at that time, I actually left the main face of what was going on, because we were trying to sort of create a diversion, if you speak, and to diffuse some of our guys that were now focused on this pushing and shoving that was going on. I ran down the tracks. Some of the guys that ran with me either gave up or didn't make it, and they turned around and went back to where everything else. But I went into the terminal. You know, I was able to climb the fence and propel myself over it, and I got into the terminal. Now, my plan was to go as far as I can to the docks to get to the pier, because I still was under the impression that some people were still following me. And when I got in, after getting to the terminal, when I landed on the rocks, it got the attention of the police officers that were nearest to that area, and they were searching for me. I was in between a couple of containers because I heard the dogs, and I heard them looking. And I saw them on the other side of the fence looking under the rail cars and everything. I knew that they were looking for some of us that had run down the track. So I had on dark clothes, so it was getting sort of scary because these guys had our guns, and they were pointing guns. And when we approached it, they had people all over, they had snipers. So I was aware of some of what the potential were. And when the dogs came around the corner, of course, I immediately put my hands up in the air and let them know I didn't have any weapon or anything. And the dog, I was more afraid of the dogs at the time than the police officers. But when they got me out of the crack, handcuffed me, and sort of roughing you up, because I think these guys, by this time, a lot was going out on the tracks. And they didn't know me, and I didn't know them. And they threw me on the trunk of a car, and removed the handcuffs and put some other kind of plastic thing on me and buckled you in behind. Of course, it was cutting into your skin a little bit. It was, and the guy, one of the state ports police, he works with us every day, recognized me, and he sort of said, "Man, take it easy. This guy is one of the nicest guys that I know." And they sort of eased up, got me in the back of the car.
When I got to the scene, of course, it was just chaos, and I didn't even see it. I just wanted to get to the front line and get some separation, because the first thing when I turned on, the name of the street escapes me now, Immigration Street, I had to jump over a guy laying over there with his head busted open. And so I'm getting to the front where all the fighting is going on, and I'm pushing people back, and I identify my officers, and I said, "Let's get everybody back to the building. Let's get them back." And we were creating space in between the line of the police and our guys. And there were one guy that I know very well that was still entangled with the cop. It was one-on-one confrontation going on. And so I just ran and hit my guy in the chest with both hands and knocked him back. And looked to see if there was anybody else in trouble. So I looked around, and when I looked around, this guy came from nowhere and just wham, across the head. And someone had pointed me out that that's the guy responsible for all of it. And I remember hearing that, and I remember my cousin was one of the ones that grabbed me under the arm when I got hit, because I had on a cap like I always do, and when I lift the cap, because I felt the crevice, and I lift the cap, and the blood just, because I'd already ran, I don't know, 150 yards, just off, never got tired, just off the adrenaline, And so I was pumping blood like crazy, couldn't see from the blood. And so I had two guys got me under the arm, and my cousin was saying, you didn't have to do that. You did not have to do that. He was not doing anything at the time you hit him. And I didn't really think about that again too much until the morning of 9/11, September 9/11. We were at the attorney's office viewing films. We had subpoenaed everything because we've been sued as well. So we get to write a discovery suit and get everything you need in order to build your case. And I remember sitting there, and we watching police film, and we looking to see where the weakness in their case saw, to see where they were provoking our people to bring it on, you know? Because those were some of the things they were saying that night to provoke our guys. Bring it on, niggas, we're gonna bust your head tonight. We were looking at films that morning where there was a pep rally at the police department in a room, something like this, where they're telling you, this is gonna be a war down here tonight. How did they know that? There wasn't no war before. So how did they know there's gonna be a war tonight? Because they had plans to instigate it. And they were pumping up like you had a pep rally. And then when they were leaving, there's a room that they get their equipment, their shields and their batons and everything, and they were coming there and it was handed it to them one at a time, just like in the military. And they were pumped, getting on the bus. And I'm watching this. And then when I got that call that night that someone was down already and there was fighting going on, I mean, I ran, I didn't see, I mean, I was just like an Olympian, I guess. And watching the film that we got from the police department at that time, I saw myself running down the street, I saw myself turning the corner, and I saw myself up front. And then I realized, wait a minute, that means that helicopter had to have the light on me all the way. I didn't even know it. So I was, I mean, from the steps of the building all the way down the street, turned the corner, and I was looking at myself like this from an aerial view. So it was targeted from the start. They evidently was monitoring calls, knew I was coming, saw me, said, hey, get that guy right there.
And on that particular night, one of the guys, one of the checkers, he actually really, they would have killed him if it wasn't for me. That's how I really got involved, because they was beating him with the nightstick, and I asked them to please stop. And the next thing I know, when they wasn't gonna stop, I went and I laid down on top of him. And I'm telling you, man, they beat me for days, man. They beat me for days. Next thing I know, they actually took me and put me in the paddy wagon. And next thing you know, we were in jail. You know, we were locked up. You know, and there were one, I forgot her name now. I think her name was Carolyn, a female policeman. Because the guys, it was one guy, Joe McPherson. They had shot him in the head with these rubber bullets. So he busted his eardrum. And then I had all these abrasions and stuff on my leg and all over my body. And they would not call a doctor. And she went and got a, she got an ice pack, and she snuck it in the jail cell. And she said, don't let them know that I gave you this. And the guys in the jail cell took the ice pack, and they put it on me. That night, they never allowed us to go to see a doctor. And Joe McPherson, to this day, he can't hear out his ears because of that, because they busted his eardrum. And the policeman busted Kenneth Raleigh head for nothing. And when they beat me, I wanted to sue the state, but they never ever allowed me to do so, because they said that the time had expired. They wouldn't allow me to do it. They had me under house arrest for a year. Then my father had cancer, and I was taking care of my daddy. The only thing they allowed me to do is come to union meeting. They wouldn't allow me to take care of my daddy. And in 2000, my daddy died. Never had a chance to take care of him the way I did. I wanted to. Because of that, it wasn't easy. And as you see now, 10 years later, it still have that effect on me because we still deal with that same type of mentality in the state of South Carolina. When we deal with that, when you look at the 5 guys that they wanted to give life in prison, that's why they're not present now, because they don't even want to talk about it. They don't want to have nothing to do with it. You know, I live it daily. It most cost me and my wife separated a while for it because she didn't understand. Because she said we shouldn't have actually, that we should have given them what they wanted. Told them they could, we couldn't.
I'm calling again. We got an individual that's down. He needs medical attention badly. Y'all need to send somebody. This is my second or third time calling y'all. We are tax-paying citizens. Amen. Y'all need to get pardon me. Y'all need to. Y'all been saying that for the last 20 minutes. If this guy died or something happened to him seriously, y'all gonna be responsible for it. Because it's not like y'all didn't get the call. Y'all got the call. Y'all not saying to nobody out there. You keep saying somebody in loot, and it don't take no EMS 30 or 40 minutes to get somebody in Charleston.
This is the next call.
And we not call you. We not made 5 or 6 calls for y'all people to send somebody out there. This don't make no damn sense.
I did not want it to happen that way. I mean, I don't mind the struggle, but when you are a leader and folks are believing in you that you're going to lead them the right way, and then something like this happen, they're the ones that are facing jail, you know, and you're free. Now, if I was with them, maybe I wouldn't have had that feeling that, you know, I can't let these guys go to jail. I cannot, you know, let them be separated from their families. Whatever's going to take, we're going to have to win their freedom. And so that was on my mind. So we were rallying first to get them out of jail. So still without sleep all night long. I was down to the police department. We would raise money because you can't get defense money out of the Union Treasury. So I'd already gotten a call, said whatever you do, they're going to be watching you to see if you're going to use any union funds. They already researched the law to get your guys out of jail. You can't do it. So we were passing a hat, raising money. And about 2 o'clock that next day, we were able to get them out. And they came out, God, they looked like I said, my first thought was the guys from the Revolutionary War, when one got the head wrap and, you know, this one, you know, they were just coming out. Remember Charles Braves, his pants was slit all the way up to here because they were beating him on his legs so much that, you know, they had to examine to see whether it was broken and that type of things. You know, he's limping and they'd help him carrying him, and guys all scarred up from the rubber bullets that they were shooting, and those things are ugly to look at. And so got him out about 2 o'clock, and then I went on to Savannah because I had a meeting down there, still with the bloody clothes on and everything. I said, you know, I need to get down there. And by the time I got there, to find out that they were being rearrested because the Attorney General, the city, had said, you know, simple trespassing, just a bad night, you know, something flared up. Instead, Attorney General stepped in and said, nope, he's going to institute felony charges against him. Then we know we were in trouble. We had never been there before, so I didn't really know exactly where to go, who to turn to.
Their own union, the International Longshoremen's Association, with headquarters in New York, was not supporting their strike, their picketing. In fact, they were isolating them. When we came to Charleston, we were the first union to come in. It was sort of like standing on the deck of a ship and throwing a life ring out to somebody who was drowning. And they really saw it that way. It was a real morale booster for them.
I felt very encouraged when I got the call from the West Coast and they told me what they were going to do. We were just still feeling our way, trying to find out where we're going to get the help to win this struggle. And then when we spotted Bill Fletcher hanging over a rail in the Hyatt Regency in Atlanta on his cell phone, and we just stood by and waited till he got off, and Royce Adams introduced me to Bill Fletcher.
He said, Bill, you got to hear this case. So, you know, I'm sort of jaded in some ways. So I listened with some degree of skepticism. But I listened to this case, and from this compelling story from a compelling individual, Ken Riley. And at the end of it, my first words were, "You've got to be shitting me." I said, "That's what happened?" And he said, "Yeah." So he then said that he had come to the CBTU convention to get help, but the help wasn't exactly forthcoming. It was more moral than anything else, and they needed some sort of material assistance.
He said, "We can't let this happen." He says, "Are you affiliated with the state AFL-CIO?" I said, "Yeah, of course we are." He said, "Have your president write Sweeney to have me to come to Charleston. I'll be there in 2 weeks." He came, and we met, and he just taking notes, asking questions, trying to get the lay of the land. And then he said, "Listen, I'm going back to DC, and I'm gonna lay out a defense plan, and you'll have it within 10 days. It's still on my computer to this day." And he asked me that day, he said, "Call me bro. Bro, you ready to travel?" I said, "Well, if I have to, yeah." You know, I'm thinking, you know, trip here, there. You know, I'm talking about crisscrossing the country 2 or 3 times in a week. Every night I was speaking somewhere, somebody, some nights speaking to 5,000, some nights may only be 15 people. But we traveled everywhere because he was setting up defense committees all over the country and using every bit of contacts he has to keep elevating the profile of the struggle.
There was a kind of nervous tremor that went through the activist community, local, nationally, and internationally, and it galvanized itself into a movement.
There were 2 strategies. One strategy was strictly legal and constitutional. We had great lawyers. We had Peter Wilborn, me, Andy Savage, and Lionel Lofton were doing a lot of the criminal defense. And we brought in a world-famous criminal trial lawyer named Michael Tiger. And the Attorney General had done a whole bunch of things that really were out of bounds. He'd gotten a grand jury to issue indictments that were very flimsy and really had a lot of irregularities. And so we prepared a defense attacking the various the various aspects, and several of us each argued different aspects of what was wrong with the indictment. Charlie Condon had also made a big publicity play. The whole thing was a publicity issue for him, and in fact he'd had a press conference in which he likened these union demonstrators to the terrorists, and this was right after the attack at 9/11. So the word terrorist really had a ring to it, and Charlie Condon went on TV to make that comparison, really a flagrant violation of any ethical conduct. And the judge basically, we tried to kick Charlie Condon out for his misconduct, and the judge basically took that approach. He basically said that he issued a ruling that said Condon could not just stay by the sidelines and issue these pronouncements. If he was going to stay in the case, he would have to actually come to court and argue the case himself and stand up in front of the judge and face the facts of what he had done that was so disgraceful. At which point, under the hammer, Charlie Condon suddenly withdrew from the case. And once he was out of the case, it was assigned to another prosecutor, and very quickly, agreements were reached that reduced the issues back to what they should always have been, which was a minor disorderly conduct, sort of like stepping on the grass in a park or something like that. And so that was the end of the legal side. There were also, but that was only half of it. The other half was all the demonstrations and all the display of solidarity with the union and with unions, other unions and supporters around the country and around the world.
I emailed the head of the IDC, the Secretary General, his name was Julian Garcia, and I said, look, if you really want the ILWU, the West Coast Longshore Union, to become part of the IDC, then you have to show the leadership and the rank and file of the ILWU what the difference is. There's a ship loaded with scab cargo that's leaving from Charleston that day. It'll be in Valencia, Spain in a week. Do what you got to do.
When you deal with a port and or maritime issues, the amount of money that it would cost to shut down a port or stop a vessel from coming is so huge. It's probably different than shutting down a factory. You know, a factory that makes, for example, shoes. You can figure out how much that costs, and it's a pretty finite or a pretty understandable number. When you're closing down commerce or closing down transportation, I think the numbers become astronomical.
Entonces el barco que se trabajó aquí llegó a Valencia y no se trabajó, y llegó a Barcelona y tampoco se trabajó. Lo que alegamos fue que, porque las huelgas de solidaridad están prohibidas, dijimos que estaba muy mal trabajado, muy mal estibado, y que entendíamos que lo habían hecho sin estibadores profesionales y que por lo tanto había una situación de peligro y no íbamos a trabajar hasta que no nos firmasen un documento que volverían a trabajar con estibadores portuarios.
And so the captain got the message very quickly, went down the gangway, got on a landline, called headquarters in London, that was Nordana Lines, and told them, he advised them it would be judicious to sign a contract.
The first victory was when the pressure was placed on Nordana, because number one, we wanted our work back. If they were going to be sailing into Charleston, the work had to be done by unionized ILA workers. It took about 4 months maybe for that to happen, and thanks to primarily to the Spanish dock workers who delivered letters to the ship captain that if the work wasn't done professionally by professional dock workers, in Charleston, they were not going to, work the ship. So they came back to the table. And we worked, they didn't want to work with our former employer. They wanted us to work for the non-union guy that they had already signed a 5-year contract with, and all these things. We wouldn't agree to that. We said, listen, it has to be an ILA employer. No non-union company would benefit off of the backs of dock workers, of the unionized dock workers. So they finally had to agree to a contract, and also at the same time remove themselves from the lawsuit that was filed against us. So that was victory number 1. Victory number 2 had to do with winning the freedom, so to speak, of the 5 indicted dock workers, Charleston Five. That part came because all of these countries and dock workers that we had met had already weighed in that, they go to trial on the 14th is the day they're going to shut down those ports everywhere. Letters were being written to our state government, resolutions coming from everywhere, from other governments, from the consulate of Denmark even, that you need to, drop the charges, the felony charges against these workers. Our state attorney general had pledged publicly on television that this is simply not going to happen. And yes, they were coming under immense pressure internationally and domestically, but that he would never drop those charges. Well, he dropped the charges. He was taken off of the case. The charges were dropped. Victory number 2. Then we were only left with the $2.5 million lawsuit that was filed against us. Certainly have the potential to bankrupt the organization. Writing discovery again, taking depositions, looking at every document. We want every document, every email ever sent, we want it. There we found that when Nordana and the non-union company at that time, WSI, entered into the contract, they anticipated that there was going to be problems. In the contract was a provision that if the ILA responded in such a way that it becomes so disruptive that they have to void the contract, that he would pay WSI $60,000 and it's done. Well, when we discovered that, how then you can say this case is worth $2.5 million when you had already agreed that if you had to tear up the contract, it was only worth 60. Certainly there was no pressure or no coercion to do that. And that's how we were able to get out of the case for $60,000 paid by an insurance company.
This experience with the Charleston Five has given not only this community and the country, but the world, a local issue that dramatizes and explains at the grassroots level how globalization works. It gave the leadership of this union a doctorate level education in struggle, in understanding something that they were involved in at a working level on the docks, to see how that work fits into the larger dimensions of globalization and international capitalism.
So I think the long-term consequences or lessons are that we can win, we can be successful, we can have a voice. There is no law, no force in the world that can overcome the collective will of all the people.